So when I was at university, a lot of my friends and I were kind of experiencing like a lot of issues around like harassment and things like that, and also being told, oh, this is just like millennial oversensitivity, everyone's a snowflake. Um, and I didn't really agree with that because I knew these people and I knew they weren't people who overreacted or who were kind of generally hysterical about things. Like I thought the things they were having a problem with were very legitimate to have a problem with. But while I was doing that, I was also still studying, and I remember like there was a scene from Pride and Prejudice that seemed just really similar to me. So there's a proposal scene where Mr. Collins, who is not particularly attractive or interesting to the heroine, proposes to her, and she says, "No, thank you, I'm not interested." And he said, "Ah, but actually you are. Like I actually know better than you, and you are in fact interested, and there is no possible way you could not be. Let me tell you what you think." And I was like, oh, that feels extremely familiar. I wonder if that's something that like that sense of familiarity or that echo is something that's present elsewhere in this book or in the rest of these. And so I started like trying to look and see what I could see that whether these 18th century novels had these more of these parallels or connections, and it turned out they had loads. So I think with the Regency era and like the 18th century more broadly, you always have a certain amount of euphemism that is required. Like it's not publicly acceptable necessarily to have incredibly open conversations about consent, particularly not if you're a woman. And so a lot of it is veiled behind like just more euphemistic language, but also things like actually talking about marriage rather than consent. So marriage is such a huge issue in that Regency period because it's like a huge transference of power and of rights, but it's also transference of consent because that consent was given at the point of marriage. So marital rape wasn't made illegal in the UK until the 1990s, so that's only very recent. And that means that every time you're talking about marriage, there is also like an undertone of talking about consent and how you're going to be treated within that marriage. And so a lot of those Regency conversations are happening in a space that's like, what is my marital situation going to be like? What's my financial freedom going to be like? Is this person going to hurt me? Like, I'm giving them all of this power over me. I think now we have more sort of legal autonomy, we have more individual rights, and we also are more able to have overt conversations about consent. And so like post Me Too, I think people are much more aware of the fact that consent issues are happening. I mean, they've obviously been happening for quite a long time, but it's like that conversation is now more current and more public, more expected, I think. Like it's seen as less of an out there conversation to be having, where I think kind of before Me Too, it was sort of, there was a sense that maybe we had achieved equality for a little bit, and I think there was like a complacency there, and that maybe this these ideas about like gender and issues were being exaggerated. And actually then there was kind of like a spilling over point where people were then sharing and talking about things more openly, and that kind of really opened that conversation up into a like public scrutiny in a different way. So it was really important to me that I understood what was happening within that, like within the courts at the time, as well as what was happening in the novels, because often like what goes on in law, that's something that's sort of factual and you can see, okay, this is definitely something that people are talking about or how they're framing the issue at the time. It's also usually like a later point. So law often changes after people's opinions change, just because it practically takes a long time to recode laws. So you can kind of see a point that people were up to and what was considered like legally criminal. So I wanted to make sure that I had this understanding of like absolutely in this period, this is the technical kind of definition of what's happening. And what was really interesting was going to some of the sources at the time called the Old Bailey proceedings. And so what those were records of everything that was sort of said in court, trimmed down, so minus a lot of the legal waffle or like technical language. So for a general audience that would come out in the newspapers, so people could read about the trials. And what's interesting there is you kind of could see what wasn't being published as well. Like there's certain points where they stop sharing information within a case, or they stop sharing information about cases full stop. Particularly if there was a not guilty verdict, because they didn't want people to like learn how to sort of crib successful not guilty defenses from it. And there's also like a sense of, oh, it's public decency, like we actually shouldn't publish anything to do with anything sexual in a newspaper at all, and so then they kind of stop. But that meant that I was able to kind of go through and look at kind of a big block of cases from the Old Bailey and kind of see, okay, what's happening here? What can I take away from that like maps onto the novels? And what things are similar, what things are different? Who is actually using the courts? And it turns out they're completely different people to who our novelists are writing about. I kind of expected that they would be wealthier people using the courts than there really were, and actually it was a lot of the like sort of servant classes, people who were like working in public houses, things like that. They're the ones using the courts. There's like no aristocracy, and like obviously the very, very poor are not able to do that. So it was an interesting kind of like a limitation on who, you could really see that there's a limitation on who that legal system was able to serve, which made like looking at the conversations in the novels then really interesting, because you could see even in court people don't talk about this very much. And so that euphemism, that's not just people being very delicate in a novel, like that's a cultural thing that's happening at the time. So actually that gives us more permission to understand the euphemism for what it is, or for what it isn't saying. So they were really informative, even though they're not kind of throughout the whole book. I mean, I would absolutely love to like go to a really glamorous ball and wear beautiful clothes and have a lovely time, but like it is a lot more complicated than that. If I was in the Regency period, I definitely wouldn't be someone who was at a ball. I wouldn't be in that economic bracket, I wouldn't be in that social bracket, and I think that's true for most of us. The Regency era, like, I'm absolutely here for period dramas, and I think they're wonderful, but if you are living in that time period as a woman, you do not have a legal existence. So like you can't go to court, you can't own property, you can't vote. Your husband literally like completely owns you from the point of marriage. Your children don't belong to you. Like it's not a situation I would ever choose to walk into. And I think what we really mean when we think about like yearning for sort of that era or those past eras is the idea of a simpler time, or a time where it's easier, where like family is important and you're not on a screen all the time, and maybe like we don't necessarily see these people having jobs, which also is often what people are stressed about. And if you are then, I'd quite like to just be able to like go on nice long walks in the countryside and ride my horse and hang out with beautiful people. Like that sounds lovely, but that's not what it was like. So yeah, I think it's that. And I also think there's an element where that ideology of like past nostalgia is getting weaponized by particular political factions. Like there's an idea of sort of returning to our heritage that is maybe disguising a little bit of this idea of returning to like a very reductive framework where like they don't have to deal with the fact that there are queer people, there are people of colour, there are people with disabilities, and like there's sort of an idea that maybe we can go back, they want to go back to a time when life is less complicated, meaning purely that they're not having to actually like treat other people like human beings when they don't want to. So I think there's sort of twofold. There's that one idea of like, let's go have a lovely time somewhere where I don't have a constant inbox full of emails, and then there's the version that's actually like people wanting to impose more sort of heteronormative gender roles on couples, or kind of control those relationships in a more problematic way. I think one of the things that really surprised me was actually with the court case research that I was doing, because I looked at this 50-year window of cases where I was like, let me see every case in the Old Bailey for rape in this 50-year window. And there were only 24 guilty verdicts, which is impossible. And I was like, well, that seems absurd. Like, this is the main court in London. There is no, there were only, there were under 200 cases that were actually brought at all in that 50-year window. Like, it's very heavily underreported. And I was like, well, what's happening with murder in that time? Like, that's another major crime. Is it comparable? Is this generally people aren't reporting stuff? And murder had a 10 times higher conviction rate. So unless it was a world where murder was 10 times more prevalent than sexual violence, like, it was really interesting seeing the way that that different crimes kind of got reported and handled. And actually, one of the things that I found that was really surprising, was that a few years later, when they removed capital punishment, so there wasn't a death penalty anymore, the conviction rate absolutely skyrocketed. And you could really see just like the impact that was having on people coming forward, especially because people are reporting from within small communities, and like it's usually people that they would know. That's always kind of a challenge in itself. But yeah, just that like enormous change from, like, I think it went up by 400% with just this reduction in the sentence penalty. So that was really surprising. I hope that some people will maybe try some of these slightly more obscure 18th century novels, because I think some of them are really good fun. But I think really it's like taking this idea that we re-narrativize the past, like we tell ourselves a story about what the past looks like, and we often use that to normalize things that are happening today. So if we say the past didn't care about consent, that's only you who care about that, this is a new problem, no one's ever had a problem with this before, calm down. They're kind of levying a historical weight against you to try and get you to stop creating a problem by highlighting a problem. And I think if we can actually look back and see, look, people did have a problem with this, they were talking about it, we've just retold that story, then I think we need to not hand over that power to rewrite the past and use that as like a bludgeoning tool. I think we need to actually kind of say, because what I hope they take away is actually, no, I'm not alone in this. Like, people are just like me, they have also had a problem with this. And this is something that we have spent a long time trying to improve the situation. We've spent a long time fighting for different rights and freedoms, some of which are now being walked back. And I think it's really important that we hold on to how important that is, how important people found it when they didn't have them, so that we don't give them up too freely. So yeah, I think it's that, like, not giving up the idea of not handing over like our past activism and not like kind of wiping that away, but actually using that as a tool to kind of try and maintain where we are and push further forward.